Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are looking at the new Dominus class Knight Valiant. Now, I have it right here. Here's the box in its wonderful red colours. And we're going to be going through a full build. Other than the armour panels, I always leave the armour panels off on any of these builds and I highly recommend you do the same. But we'll get to that as we go through the video. I'm also going to be commenting on how much of a Games Workshop cash cow this particular model is and how very clever they've been with the frame build and the components of the kit. Now before we jump into the video, if you are enjoying my content and you're enjoying the Warlord Titan series and all my Knights and Painter guides, don't forget to give this video a like, don't forget to drop a subscription to the channel and hit that bell button for notifications of all my uploads. It would be very, very much appreciated. But in the meantime, let's crack straight into the video. So then, here is the result of my mini haul that I had last week with the release of the new Knight Codex. So I've got the Valiant, the Castellans and the new Helverins. But this video we're going to be focusing on the Valiant, and there's one reason for that, is because of this gun here, the Harpoon Gun, which does a flat 10 damage. It is ridiculous. Yep, that's right, the Thunderbolt Harpoon Gun, which has a range of 12, is heavy 1, strength 16, AP of -6 and a flat 10 damage. That is utterly crazy. And if you wound your target, just for good measure, it does an additional D3 mortal wounds. And if you're targeting vehicles or monsters, you can re-roll to hit. That is pretty epic for a model that's costing you less than anything other than Forgeworld Knight kind, or Forgeworld Titan kind of armament. And you can see there just about in the screen how powerful and crazy this weapon is. So obviously we've got to build this Knight version first, right? So then, lifting the lid off the box, we see that we've got the standard instruction manual in it, all its glorious Technicolor format these days. We've got a base, we've got a set of Knight decals, and then we have 3 frames. Now, 2 of these frames are identical, and then one of them is the Valiant specific one. And I'm showing that Valiant one there, so you can see it's got all the weapon components, or the primary 2-arm weapons. It's got some of the individual pieces that make this model a bit more unique compared to the other builds. It's also got the top carapace and other bits and pieces like that as well. Now we take a look at the 2 other sprues, and at this point you go, hang on a minute, they look identical. How are we going to make 2 different leg sections with all the components that are in this one sprue? Now this is where it gets a little bit clever, and we'll get to that in a second. So I've had a quick read through the instructions and we are ready to build, and you'll notice that we are running at 2 times the normal speed to keep the video at a manageable length for you guys to watch and not get too bored really. So got my handy clippers, my plastic glue and my scalpel out ready to go, and we're just going to follow through the instructions, and we're going to get to the point where we can see how clever this kit really comes into it, and how I imagine the accountants at Games Workshop HQ are probably rubbing their hands together. So the standard, just looking through the frame, trying to find all the right numbers, because frames are laid out economically and not in numerical order. So you just got to go fishing for all the parts as usual. But don't worry guys, I'm not going to be slow-mowing and going through this video, cutting out pieces and cleaning parts. But traditionally in most of my assembly videos and my sort of guides and unboxings, I do just start off by doing this, because I don't know whether you've seen any of my videos before, so I typically assume you haven't. And then you can just see sort of the basic process I do to go through cleaning and cutting parts out of the frame. So normally, yep, just standard clippers, and then I use a scalpel predominantly rather than a mould removing tool. I find the scalpel a little bit sharper, a little bit more accurate, can get into some of the nooks and crannies. Certainly I think it's better for removing some of that mould line flash that you get on coils and cables and so on. And yeah, I just find it a little bit easier and less cumbersome. So we're just cleaning up all the leg components to make the first leg. And with those first components all cleaned up, we can now work on these bottom halves of the leg. So these are the sort of the shin pieces that join into the feet, and then there's 2 pistons either side. Now putting these legs together is no real difference to putting together any of the other previous Knight kits, to be honest. The leg sections are vaguely similar. Only in this aspect we have this sort of uniqueness that we're going to get to in a second to show you how the exact same components go together in a different way to make 2 different leg poses. And that's what makes this particular kit very clever from a construction and design perspective. Now while those two halves are together and just drying, obviously you get some kind of slight misalignment in some cases. So I'm just cleaning up those parts to make sure that everything is flush when it comes to all the other components that add on to this, and obviously for painting. Now there's two little mini pistons that go front and rear, and when it comes to the other leg, all you have to do is reverse that position. So there's a slightly longer piston and a slightly shorter piston. So the second leg, you reverse those connections so that the shorter one is in the opposite position that you assembled this one. So we now go on to the upper thigh section. Again, this is just two simple halves that just click together. Nothing super exciting about that. In fact, that's almost identical to the previous Knight kit, to be honest. But again, this is where we get to a little bit of cleverness with the pre-fabrication of these, unless you want to start getting into your conversions and so on. But you see there's two holes, but only one lug. So depending which leg you're doing, and I'm doing this particular right leg, you put that lug into only one of those holes. I think it's the rearmost hole on this one, and that makes the leg look a little bit more upright. Once we've done that, we can just attach the feet. So there are the two piston holes, there's this piston ring that goes on the top, and then the central socket for the ball of the ankle, I guess you could call it. And there are two side pistons. Now again, one of these side pistons is slightly longer than the other one. Now when you're putting it together, I do recommend that you glue the central part first and don't do the other pistons. And then you can see how, again, this is where it gets a bit clever. So not only have we got two different pistons that you attach to the main leg, but the two side pistons are of a different distance or a different length as well. So if you put the shorter piston on the inside, then the leg will naturally lean inwards, and if you put it on the outside, it will naturally lean outwards. And this is how we get two different leg poses from the same kit. So the four pistons make up one component of it, and then the knee joint makes up the other. And when you put them together like this, you can see that the right leg leans into the right, the left leg leans into the left, and we end up with two different legs from the same components. Now this, in my opinion, is sheer genius. And why is it super genius for those that are not super business savvy? Is basically you've got two 100-pound kits that only require 3 different frames. Yeah, so the Castellan Knight as well as the Valiant Knight share the common components for all the legs and the torso and so on. And that is just, you know, each kit is 3 sprues each, 2 of which are the same, but 2 of which are shared across both kits. So for the design of just 3 sprues, you've now got £200 worth of models. The profit margin on that must be exceptional. So that's why I think the accountants are doing a great thing and working out here that is just a great profit margin. The reality is, though, the designers that are behind that to make that actually happen have earned themselves a pay rise. And in fact, Games Workshop staff earned themselves a £5 million bonus. So people that are doing this kind of stuff probably deserve a big portion of that. Anyway, enough about the semantics of the business practice there. Let's move into the rest of the build. So you can see here I've actually started cutting up the parts for the chassis and also the head. And very, very similar to the previous Knight kits, to be honest. You've got 2 side walls, you've got the base plate, you've got the top carapace, and you have a rear engine section. Slight difference in variation here between the old Knight kits and the new ones. On those side weapon sections, or where the weapon hooks are for the weapon arms, is that they're actually integrated to the side sort of stabilisers, the hip stabilisers that are common across all large Knights and Titans. So they're a single piece rather than 2 pieces now, which is, you know, just cuts down on your build. The head is exactly the same as a regular Knight, so you have 2 halves. You have a pivot joint which attaches to the front of the chassis, and then you have a front faceplate. You only get one choice of faceplate in these rather than several. But as you're only building one of them, and it is different to the Castellan and not a normal Knight kit where you can build several different variants, that's not really a big issue. And the reality is, if you play a standard kind of 2,000 point army, you can only just about barely squeeze one of these in to have an effective force that's not just made up of 3 models. So the head, just sort of test fitting it there onto the front faceplate, but again I won't be attaching that so that it's easy to paint. So we can now look at how the torso itself is built. Now this base plate and the top section, the top carapace, come out of your unique frame. The 2 side pieces come out of your leg frame. So again, each left and right side is identical. And compare that to the previous Knight kits. I do a lot of comparisons here, but you know, more people have probably got the older Knights than they have one of these. They were left and right sided in the previous Knight kit in order to sort of key it, so they sort of it's difficult to explain here, but you've got the piece that goes forward so that you can know that it's pointing in the right direction, and then you have the rear section where the engine mounts go on, so they had to be left and righted. Now these guys here are exactly the same. The left and right are the same, but what we do is we extend the front sections with two other identical pieces. Again, very, very clever bits of engineering design here. Another unique piece is in there as well, so the sort of the curvature of the front there, that comes off of your unique sprue because there's only one of them. Pretty much anything that only has one component comes off of your unique sprue. That seems to be the rule here. These Titanic vehicles come with dual reactors, so in comparison to the previous Knights, this has got two big reactor cores that you can see on the back there. And that's reflected in the rules as well, is that when these things go to 0 wounds, you're rolling double dice to see whether it explodes. And if they both explode, then you're causing more mortal wounds over a larger distance. So, yeah, quite volatile when they do go catastrophic. So you can see here, this is the sort of the arm section, sort of the bracket of the arm section just going on here. This is what I was sort of mentioning earlier, that was in two components in previous builds, but in this one, it is a single component, and it sort of levers over into the side and then mounts into the receiving lugs on the side brackets there. Once those side pieces are attached, we can now move on to the sort of front extenders. Now these basically convert whichever side you've got facing the front, because these two side pieces are exactly the same. They extend them to make them look like they should be at the front, and that allows the front panel to attach. So you can see there, just on the side, they sort of fit on and basically just extend those bits to make them appear to be the front section, really. Whereas the previous Knight kits, that would be all integrated into the one component, which would then make the left and right panels only left and right, rather than this clever design of ambidextrous parts that you then modify to whichever side you put them together on. So you can see that just sort of extends them forward, and that allows us to mount that front plate in a second. Having given that a few seconds for the glue to start to dry, you can see now that that front section fits quite snugly onto there, and this is the bit that contains the head mounting side. So, but as I explained earlier, I'm not going to be affixing the head because I want to paint that separately. But I'm putting all the pieces together that I will paint individual. So this will be, you know, a multi-part assembly with a multi-part painting phase. So the arms and so on, the carapace, the leg sections, the head, all those kind of bits will be glued on right at the very end once they've been painted. There are a couple of sections to go on the back, which is sort of like a power pack or a stabilizer kind of piece. This is quite common amongst all the other Knights as well, so you do get this feeling of commonality across all of the builds. So they do look like they've come from some kind of similar STC design. And you put a sort of a backpack section on and then two side sections. Now that curved rear section came from your unique frame. The two side sections come from your common frame, so they replicated across the two. Again, all part of the clever design. Money, money, money. But we just put on those two sections there, and that forms that rear sort of power generator, servo, relay section, whatever you really want to call it. Once we're happy with those pieces assembled, we can just have a quick look at there as a close-up on the camera, and we can move on to the next sections. Now the other pieces that need to go on here are the exhaust sections. These are mounted slightly different from the other Knights. Instead of coming right out the top, they come more at an angle out of the back. Primarily because the carapace on this is pretty large, and it mounts 3 different weapon systems on the carapace. Well, 2 different weapon systems in 3 carapace mounting positions. So the exhaust sections protrude more out of the back rather than out of the top, which makes for an aesthetic design and means that your weapon systems aren't getting clogged in soot. You can see here just 2 mounts there. There's 2 halves again off of the common frame. So these doesn't matter which side you put these on, they're exactly the same. Whereas the original Knight, they were sort of left and right keyed because that's the way they were. And we can see here now that section is now basically complete, and we've just got some other little bits and pieces that we can put together. So this model bears 2 twin melter guns that come out of its armpits, is probably the best place to describe it. So left and right of the head are 2 twin melter guns for close range anti-tank ability. So, and these are on a full swivel as well. So you put the two halves, or the two melter guns together around into each other, and then they have a little mounting lug like this, which allows them to go up and down. And then when you put the two halves of the bracket that mounts onto the chassis on, it means it's got a 360-degree swivel when it's loose like this, and then it can sort of flex up and down by about 45 degrees. When I'm putting these together, I will put them so that they are manoeuvrable, but then when it goes into the final build, the likelihood is I will glue those static rather than having them move around. That's just my preference. If you want to leave them so they're fully mobile, that's entirely up to you. But for me, I'm not really a fan of, you know, movable parts on your figures like this. It doesn't make much sense to me. But once they're painted and while they're loose, you can then just pose them for your final fit. So we've got a few sections to do before we move on to the exciting bits of the arms, and that's just to finish off the carapace. So there's these two sort of disc sections which form the left and right weapon mounting system for the Dominus class Knight. There's also a couple of little handrails here, grab rails for the noble pilot from the household that he gains access to his war vehicle. Again, very similar to the old style Knights. There are only two grab rails here rather than a multi-section one that you get on the other top torsos of the other types of Knights. So there's a left and right one here. They just go into little grooves that are mounted onto there. And that's pretty much the top section as far as we can really take it from an assembly perspective. Oh, and there's a Mechanicum symbol to go on the front, obviously. Now, if you have read the Codex, you know that these can be Mechanicum or Imperial aligned. Now, if I was doing a Mechanicum one, which I am, I'd use the Mechanica symbol. I think they missed a trick here for an Imperial Eagle for Imperial aligned, but that's just by the by. There's plenty of spare parts that you can use in order to replace that if you wanted an Imperial Eagle on that front, for example. So now we can move into the arm sections. So you can see on the screen I've laid out all of the arm sections that I need and all the armour panels put to one side as I've cut everything out of the rest of the frames. And this is where I'm going to go a little bit divergent and not assemble everything as it should be out of the packet. I am going to magnetise. Now, the reason I'm magnetising these sidearms isn't because the weapons are interchangeable, they're not. These come with fixed weapon options as part of the build. You can't swap them out for anything else. But when it comes to storage and transport and all those kind of things, when you're moving models around, anything with a big kit, you might want to consider this as an option. And you never know, in the future, Games Workshop or Forgeworld may come out with alternative weapon arms for the Dominus class, and you might just think, I don't want to buy another kit, I just want to get hold of the weapons, and I can switch them out. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So I've got these little magnets in front that you've just seen on the screen, and I'm going to insert one into the lower part of the arm and one into the upper part of the arm. And to do that, you need to sort of fill out the void that comes with this when you cut these open with a bunch of green stuff, and that just strengthens the part and gives the magnet something to adhere to in the cavity that you're going to put them into. And I'll show this a little bit closer up because it's a bit tricky to show on screen while I'm working the green stuff and the magnets into place. But I've got a little close-up section showing exactly what I mean coming up in a minute. Now, the magnetisation here is entirely optional. It is up to you if you want to do this or whether you just want to go with the standard pivot build that Games Workshop integrate. You can see there the magnet and the green stuff just plugged into that hole. But for me, yeah, it's just a storage kind of thing and a transport thing, really, because I'm not going to glue the top and the bottom halves of the model together. That enables me to transport it potentially in foam or in a smaller box. And then again with the weapon systems, I can sort of remove those as well. Just makes things a little bit easier to transport, especially if you're putting them in, you know, sort of pick and pluck foam in order to put them into a regular GW or other branded gaming bag. Now, just to be sure, always on your magnets, ensure your orientation and your north-south is identical on each side. Just in case, you know, you can actually then switch weapons here. I can actually put the left weapon on the right arm and the right weapon on the left arm. Doesn't really make any difference. That's just making sure that you're just being smart with your magnets, really. Now, the top half of the arm, you have to put the magnet in really before you glue the two halves together. It just makes it a little bit easier to do, and to do that again, I'm just packing out the rest of the cavity with some green stuff. Just gives the magnet nowhere to go in case you sort of knock it or it dislodges in the build, and it just means it's easier to do. Here you can go. This is the close-up I was talking about. Forgive the wobbly camera. So the little the little lug that comes on that upper arm piece has been entirely replaced with a magnet, and the upper arm you can see I've just stuffed there with some green stuff, and the magnet will just sit in that recess on top of the green stuff itself. I hope that kind of helps understand how I've packed these pieces out and where the magnets are going to go. And if you hang around to the very end of the video where I magnetise those carapace weapons as well, you can see a little bit more detail how I've actually gone about that, and you can see exactly how it works in it, just a little bit more detail from the camera angle. So we're just putting that upper arm magnet in now. You just see just applying the super glue first, get the magnet in, make sure it is the right way round to receive the other weapon. Always keep checking your magnets. I'm pretty bad for it, to be honest. I actually put, I think, one of these in the wrong way round to start with. Had to start from scratch. That's why the video has a little bit of an edit in it. The joys of video editing, you can get rid of your mistakes so that you don't have to watch them. Now, using a non-magnetic material to press this magnet in, so I'm using the back end of a paintbrush or a brass rod, neither of which are attracted by the magnet, unlike blades or other bits of metal that you've got knocking around like sculpting tools or anything like that. That's just going to stick to the magnet and not be the ideal tool to press into the right place. You can see they're just making sure that my magnetism is the right way around, just gently pushing them together but not allowing them to touch. So now we've got these components all together, we can actually build the rest of the weapon system around that lower arm mounting position. So the first weapon we're going to build here is the Harpoon Gun, which is the super strength weapon. So this comes with two identical halves, again, all part of the cleverness of the build. Now this does come off of the unique sprue actually, so there's a left and right half. They fit around your sort of lower arm position, and that enables it to be sort of slightly moved a little bit up and down to give you a bit of a variation in the build so that you can have it angled nicely. There's a rear little section that just caps off the end there. There is a skull icon on that, so make sure that your orientation is correct and the skull is not upside down, otherwise it will look a bit silly when you come to paint it. Then there are two side pieces here, and these are they kind of look like hydraulic components is probably the best way to sort of fire this chain-linked harpoon gun towards the enemy. They look like, you know, sort of air cylinders or compressed air cylinders really that produce the power behind the harpoon gun. We just sort of making sure that that middle section does freely rotate, and there are two side pistons, and these will eventually, well, they will lock in the arm position. So once you're happy with which angle you want the harpoon gun to sit at, you can then attach the left and right piston rods, and that will lock that into its physical position. You can't really can't really glue those in with the with flexibility or movement of that arm section. It just won't work the way you have to glue one end in. Now I'm using a little clamp here on the front and rear section just to make sure these things dry fully together and they sort of they fuse together correctly. So I'm just using a couple of clamps. Just means I haven't got to sit there and hold them while that those pieces dry. These did feel like they're trying to force themselves slightly apart, and there was a little bit of a gap at the top. But this solves that kind of problem. Now while the glue is setting on there, we can get to work on the harpoon end itself. This is made up of 4 components. There's this V-shaped piece, then there's the nose cone, and then there are 2 side pieces that go on here as well. And there we go, just putting that nose cone on there. And this, if you look at the detail of this, sort of shows that these side 4 sections look like when they're launched into a vehicle, they'll then sort of splay out, and as the harpoon retracts, it basically will pull all the innards out of whatever target it's got, and that really kind of dictates or instigates or shows the kind of damage that this weapon does to reflect that damage value that it has in rules. That harpoon section just fits on the nose of the section that we've already glued, and we can just attach that there, and that's nice and simple. And that's pretty much the weapon built. Most of the detail is actually already integrated into the plastic moulding, so there's not really much to glue onto that. Now we've done the other arm section already, so just following the same magnetic guide that I did earlier in this video, and we can just attach this to the secondary weapon. Now the second weapon on the Knight Valiant is the Conflagration Cannon, which is basically a triple-barreled Uber Flamer. There are 3 barrels on it, so it's got heavy 3d6 shots which auto hit at strength 7, AP -2 and 2 damage. So yeah, it's pretty dangerous when it gets up close. It's got a range of 18, so when you combine that with the maximum move the knight has of 10 inches, you've got a range of 28. Auto hitting in this edition is pretty handy. AP -2 is pretty good, it will negate most cover saves, and 2 damage means that multi-wound models need to be aware and be fearful of it. There's a number of little sections here then which are mainly sort of 2 halves of the additional barrels, and there's sort of the Prometheum feed pipes really that's going to come out of the rear tanks and ignite those flamers at the front. So it's almost like a cutting welder. So if you've ever used like a cutting torch or a welding tool before, you have sort of the little bit that causes the spark out of the front, and then the fuel is forced through the pipes, and that causes your combustion and then your flame effect. So it's kind of well thought out really, that all of the parts that look like they should be there to make it semi-realistic in this future fantasy game that we play, it's kind of considered. So just attaching those barrels, and then we'll attach those side pipe sections onto it in a second. So now we've got the halves of those barrels put together, we can just glue those onto the end of the weapon, and you can see there all 3 barrels all nicely lined up. Again, a very nice little fit and build, no questions and no problems there. We can just take these extra sort of pipe sections and we can attach those to the weapon. But one of the other things I want to look at is that each of these weapon arms also comes with a side armour plate. I'm just trying to work out exactly where that fits. That fits into the little recess on the lower arm. And what I'm doing is actually attaching the sort of the mounting piece there, which is like a little U-shaped piece that attaches to the arm and to the armour panel. I can attach that now, but then again I'll be leaving those separate so that I can paint them with the rest of the armour sections later on, and then attach those once everything else is built. If you attach them now, then you won't be able to get to some of the detail on the weapon. So now we can move on to the upper arms. So this is the parts that I've already magnetised, the top halves of the arms, and then they have the parts that mount into the side of the torso itself. Again, almost identical to the smaller Knight brothers that these have. It's 2 halves, and then there's a weird little piston piece that you can leave sort of gently loose at the moment whilst you work out a final pose of the weapons and the arms. So just gluing those 2 halves of the shoulder mount together, and these twist into the top half of the chassis of the Knight. Now we repeat this twice, obviously, for the left and the right arm, and we just glue the second half of the second arm together there. And just make sure that you've got the orientation kind of right here, so there's square and angled at the lower side. And if you're going left and right armed, which we are here obviously, then you just need to make sure that you've got the upper arm attaching to those elbow to the shoulder joints in the right way round, so that you haven't got any problems there. Now with most of the vehicle built, we've just got the weapons to go onto the carapace. Now you get 2 pairs of missiles, and then you get 2 pairs of cannons. Now the missiles are shield breaker missiles. They're heavy 1, strength 10, AP -4, and do D6 worth of damage. And these things ignore invulnerable saves. That is pretty epic. There's not very many weapons in this game that actually ignore invulnerable saves. Now you'll be able to take disgustingly resilient and things like that against them, but there aren't that many weapons these days that do go through an invulnerable save. So these are pretty rare so far. Now by default these come with 1 shield breaker cannon and 2 pairs of 4 shield breaker missiles, but you can replace one of the shield breaker missiles with a twin shield breaker cannon. So in effect you can have 2 cannons and 1 missile system, or 2 missile systems and 1 cannon. Now what you want to be able to do, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is magnetise those so that you can switch them in and out very, very easily. So what we'll do is we'll just assemble all the parts first, and then we'll get onto the way that I've magnetised these afterwards. Now they do come with a little peg on the bottom which does slot into the top of the carapace, and you could do it that way and just leave it like that, but the peg and the hole that it goes into is pretty loose, and the weapons would just keep falling off during game. So doing this the magnetising way that I'm going to do it is probably the recommended way to do it, to make sure that they remain stable on the vehicle and don't just keep falling off mid-game. So the cannons themselves, then there's two halves of the barrels, there's top and bottom halves, then there's two halves of the rear part of the barrel system, which form sort of the rotation and I guess where all the ammunition would be kept. The missiles themselves have a single piece in the middle and then the two missiles attached left and right of those, and we'll see that here. And the missiles were a little bit fiddly to attach really, the instructions weren't particularly clear and the way they attached just seemed a little bit off to me, to be honest, which is why I'm sort of double checking the instructions now. But eventually they just go on and they just hold anyway. Yeah, I just thought that the build of those just didn't quite seem right to me. I don't know why, whether it's just me, but there is a little mounting bracket on each side of the missile that attaches onto the central sort of targeting system or the launch rails, and it just seemed a little bit odd, so I just kind of glued them in and it just kind of worked, but it didn't feel particularly natural. Now I've just taken a picture here of everything loosely attached. So as I said, these weapon systems are not attached to the carapace and the armour up the top there and the head. They're not physically glued on, the same as the twin melter guns, but just to show you sort of the stage it can get to where it'll just hold itself together without any issue. But the exciting bit here then really comes to the magnetisation of these weapons. And you can see here they freely pivot around with the twin siegebreaker cannons and the missile rack, and they just all sort of pop off nice and easy. So how did we achieve this effect? So I've got two different types of magnets I'm going to use here. One of which goes into the weapon system, so you can see that there. And then one of which goes underneath the carapace armour. So these magnets are all identical, and they are 4mm wide and 2mm deep. Now the ones underneath are 5mm wide and 1mm deep, and I've just glued those underneath the canopy. Obviously remembering your north and south. So this is the stack of magnets I've got. You can see all these little 5mm by 1mm, and at the other end of the stack is the 4x2. And just for good measure, here's a tape measure showing you what 4mm really looks like. I don't know why I've included this in the video, but you can see there exactly the size of the magnet. Sorry, I'm laughing to myself on my own video, and I could edit it out, but I'm not going to. What you need to do though is drill out the sections underneath the weapons. So I've just used a pin vise here with a 4mm drill, and then you just drill into the bottom. You remove the little lug that comes on it, drill them in, and as you can see, those weapons just clip in and hold quite nicely and easily removed, all to sort of finger pressure touch. You can see there you can switch out for twin shield breakers or twin shield breaker cannons or the twin missiles. And those under magnets are just glued directly underneath, and if you're worried about being able to see them, you haven't really got to worry about it, because that one at the rear will disappear underneath into the cavity of the torso and you'll never see it. And the two that are on the left and right, yes, you can see them from this angle, but you know, who's realistically going to look at it from this angle? But you've also got large shoulder pauldrons that go over these side pieces once we're ready to assemble the model. And once you put those on, no one's even going to notice that there's magnets underneath. So it kind of disguises any of the hidden work that you've done there, and it just means that you can now switch those weapons round accordingly to the build that you want to do for your Knight Valiant. Now, as I promised earlier in the video, we can show you a bit closer up now the magnets that are used for these weapon arms. So you can see there the weapon system itself has the magnet buried in there, packed out with green stuff to fill the cavity, and then the upper arms again, you've replaced the sort of the lip that comes with the weapon so that it would clip into and make the weapon turn like that, or you can just have them fully magnetised and you can switch left and right handed. So if you're running two of these particular builds of Knights, you can actually offer some variety here by having two different weapons on the two different arms. So there we go then guys, that is the Dominus class Valiant Knight, all complete, ready for painting. So I'd love to know what you think about these new Knight Dominus class models. Have you got them? Are you excited for them? Do you think they'd fit in your Knight army? Bear in mind they come in with all their weapons at quite a lot of points, pushing sort of 580-ish at a first glance. So you can't really get, you know, too many of these. If you can't get 4 in an army, for example, but you could run 2 or 3 and then have not a lot else. So I'd love to know in the comment section what you think. Do you think Games Workshop are very clever with the build? Do you think it's a great model? I've seen some people that are not particularly enamoured with the styling of these new Dominus classes, But for me, this one really takes a good chunk out of the Warlord Titan. If you look at the styling of the Warlord and the styling of this, you can see there's a lot of similarity in that design, and I think that reflects the 40k background, where stuff back in the past was where all the innovation was. Stuff in the 41st millennium, they've run out of innovation, they have to rely on old knowledge, otherwise you can't invent new things. So I can see that there's some similarity in, you know, perhaps the Mechanicus back in the day when they were sort of designing these kind of models. Just, well, Mechanicus weren't designing models, they were designing real fighting machines, obviously. But I can see that similarity, and I think that's a really cool thing. But I'd love to know in the comment section what you think of the particular Knight Castellan, or even the Knight Valiant that we've shown in this video. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.